coverage begins now. It's great to have you with us. This is the look outside the Weather Network headquarters in Oakville in the GTA. And yes, we are seeing already that snowfall and perhaps the ice and many precipitation types expected to be a factor with this system. My name is Matt Hamill, and we'll open up just by looking at some of the weather alerts currently in effect. So Toronto and Oakville, like we just saw, under the winter storm warning. So even a bit more snow in the forecast than originally anticipated. We'll get to more of that in a moment. But really, the main thrust of this winter storm, really the ice storm, is all these freezing rain warnings away from Windsor, stretching to the Niagara Falls area. And we are expecting perhaps potentially very long power outages along with very hazardous travel conditions, not just for this afternoon, this evening's commute, stretching into tomorrow morning and perhaps even tomorrow afternoon and evening as well. Some of these hazardous travel impacts. We've seen a number of areas taking precautionary measures, preemptive closures. A number of university campuses have already closed down for the day or are going to be soon, along with Niagara region, some areas there already making changes to school bus running tomorrow. So we will unpack all of the impacts of this winter storm, along with a meteorologist, Jacqueline Whittle, who joins us now. And Jacqueline will also be joined by storm hunter Mark Robinson in a moment, who's on the road. But Jacqueline, I kind of touched on it. Lots of different precipitation types and lots of different hazards to look out for with this storm.
Yeah, that's right, Matt. Lots to unpack, as you said, with this Colorado low, which has already impacted the states. And we're going to just go to the radar right now, Matt, because it's an impressive one. You can clearly see this area of low pressure has every type of precipitation that, well, a classic Colorado low would have. So we have the kind of the center of low pressure around there. We have a cold front and a warm front like this. What does that mean? It means that we are drawing up moist, warm air, Matt, from the Gulf of Mexico into southern Ontario. That warm air is overrunning cold air, and that's how you get that freezing rain setup. So this is one of those things that, once it moves in, it already has, by the way, Matt. Let's go to the radar, have a bit more of a zoomed in look. This is the best way to just kind of see where we're at with the storm right now. Windsor has already seen, Matt, 3 hours of freezing rain, and it already is starting to accrete on surfaces there, according to some webcams. If anyone has an update from Windsor along the 401 through Essex County, through Lambton County, I'd really love to hear from you if you're watching us on social media. Love to see what kind of freezing rain you've seen. And then, Matt, you see the switch over from London over to Hamilton. Kitchener-Waterloo is kind of right on that area that we have to watch carefully with the snow and the rain, the freezing rain. But Guelph, Toronto, right downtown, this is all snow, as you showed us on that video in the last hour from our headquarters in Oakville. It's all snow there, Matt. So that's where the heaviest snow is going to be setting up. And this is a classic winter storm. And I know that you have some winter storm advice and tips behind you. Maybe you could share that with the viewers. Yeah, well, let's start off with just the timing. Like, you gave a good summary of that, Jacqueline. But for the evening commute here, driving home from work, we're advising if you could get off work early, that would be the move tonight, because that heavy snow already pushing in. And then overnight, we see some of that ice really pushing further north. So that could be impacting areas in the Toronto area, snow and ice pellets. And then there's that Thursday morning impacts as well, and even into our Thursday evening. So just such a long duration event, Jacqueline. And, precipitation types wise, we were talking about, we're going to get pretty well the whole gamut here. We have rain at times, but really the main thrust, freezing rain, is that big concern. Ice pellets as well, and then the snow. And we've certainly seen a bit of an upgrade in the snow totals for areas like Toronto, which we'll continue unpacking. There's a quick look at the ice and how much we're expecting. And Jacqueline, I'll now turn to, because we are in that 10 to 15 millimeter range, and if we could go full screen with this, we are in that tree damage, long-lasting power outage potential. So that is what we're really going to be continuing to watch, the main thrust being the ice, Jacqueline, but of course the snow as well. And we're continuing to see just how much of southern Ontario is under that risk of the potential power outage, and quite a large area in red there, from Niagara Falls all the way to Sarnia, and even stretching a bit further north than that along the shorelines of Lake Huron. Again, that is the main area of the impacts of ice.
and we'll talk a bit more about the snow later. Now, Jacqueline, we're going to have continued questions pouring in from anybody watching our live stream, so we encourage you, if you have any questions, to visit the Weather Network on Twitter, tag us, ask your questions, and of course, right in the comments of this live stream as well, we can get to them. And Jacqueline, there's a look at Mark Robinson's view on the road, already pretty ugly as far as those travel conditions.
Yeah, that's right. Mark, can you hear us? Are you with us right now, or are we just seeing your visual? Because, boy, the roads look like they are deteriorating.
Yeah, Jack, I can absolutely hear you. I'm actually traveling between Guelph and Kitchener-Waterloo region, just headed towards the 401. I'm eventually going to be going all the way down to London, and I think I'm going to get to see that changeover that you were talking about, that change from the snow that we've got here over to the rain, the freezing rain, and the ice pellets. I've been watching very closely where that line is, and you can actually see it on certain types of radar. You can actually see the switch over from one precipitation type to the other. And at the moment, that line is right around the London area, just up to the south of London. And that's sort of, we've had the model sort of bouncing back and forth, but freezing rain is so tricky to forecast because everything needs to be balanced. You need to have that perfect balance to give you the freezing rain. Otherwise, you get rain, or you just get ice pellets, or you just get snow. Freezing rain is very, very tricky. There are some areas in southern Ontario, though, that are showing that nice balance, and that's basically where I'm headed to. I'm headed down towards just south of London just to see if that area is going to be the worst hit by freezing rain. And one of the things about freezing rain is that it tends to take place nocturnally. In other words, overnight, because you get that touch more cooling of the surfaces, and then you'll have that super cold water freezing on contact. So hopefully I can get down to that area because we want to show you how bad this situation can get when you have a lot of freezing rain.
Yeah, well, Mark, we hope that
Hey, Mark, we were just showing...
Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Oh, I apologize, Matt. Mark, we were just showing the radar. Maybe we could take that full again. I'm going to show you where Mark is going to see that transition. So Mark is headed to just southwest of London. And what he was just referring to, and Mark is giving us a really great visual of the snow and sort of the wet snow. As he transitions into this region, you're going to be seeing more of a rain falling from the sky, but it's going to be freezing on contact. And as Mark said, a very tricky thing to not only forecast, but also a very tricky thing to drive in. So be very careful out there, Mark. We're going to come back to Mark. I want to just show you too a couple maps, before we get much further into the storytelling. I think it's important to talk about this timing. So let's go to that right now. You can see here by about 5 p.m. And this is one of our short range models, so this is pretty reliable. But along the 401, as you're going, say, from Kitchener over to Woodstock, over to London, this is where it makes that change into potentially ice pellets and then just straight freezing rain. You can see across the 401 corridor, as Mark mentioned, overnight. So a nocturnal freezing rain, not a good situation. You could be waking up to power outages. You could be in the overnight, with some power outages. Make sure you have an emergency kit at all times. Charge up your phones now while you have power, just in case. Now, Matt, you can see there, that's 10 to 15 millimeters of freezing rain where Mark's going to be. I want to put this into perspective, and I would love to chat with Mark later about this because, of course, we had the 2013 ice storm, which I remember forecasting and remember covering very well. It was over Christmas. Just to put that ice storm in perspective, there was 25 millimeters to 30 millimeters, so double this. That was that kind of ice storm. The Quebec ice storm being even worse than that. So we're not talking about a historical event, Matt, but we are certainly talking about the potential for power outages, some slick conditions. And then there's the snowfall story, Matt. Maybe I can just hand that over to you in a second. But look at this, 15 to 25 centimeters of snowfall for the downtown core. Matt, we know what 2 centimeters, 5 centimeters does to downtown Toronto. So this is going to certainly take a lot in the way of cleanup and making sure people know that, the next 24 hours, probably best just to stay put, Matt.
Absolutely. And again, that was sort of the precautionary advice. We knew that today was going to really start to get ugly as the day went on, and we hope that many people were able to perhaps get away and start that drive home from work early. But even the drive into work tomorrow and the drive home tomorrow, we still expect to be a little dicey. Now, there's a look at the snowfall totals. Interesting to note, Toronto kind of got upgraded to more snow and less ice, so we could see some very substantial snowfall totals, particularly for just a busy area like downtown Toronto. But Jack, I just want to rewind back to some of the freezing rain and power outages concerns. If we could take this full behind me, and that's really some of those preparations to make. Now, we are kind of getting a little down to the wire for going out and securing any preparations, but batteries, first aid kits, of course, a prolonged power outage. You want those snacks, water, animal food, phone charger, flashlight, and blankets, some of those things to have on hand, because when you talk about just hours and hours of freezing rain that we could see in some areas, of course, you need to be prepared for the long haul. But I like how you pointed out also the snowfall we're expecting, and this wide look on the radar, Jack, really just highlights how long and how all-encompassing the storm is and those different precipitation types we see by color.
You bet. I mean, we've got freezing rain right now along this boundary from Omaha, Nebraska, all the way to New York City. So that's a wide swath of mixed precipitation. Not that that's that unnormal. It's just, it's just along a warm front. We see this sort of thing set up. We also have thunderstorm activity pretty close to the Great Lakes. Look at this, right along that boundary where the is straight rain. We've got some thunderstorm activity through areas like, looks like Ohio and into Indiana, back over to parts of Missouri as well. I don't suspect we're going to be seeing much in the way of thunderstorm activity. However, we are looking at some pretty intense downpours right around the shores of Lake Erie on our radar right now. These areas here showing some high reflectivity, just some heavy rain basically. But what it does show you is the precipitation rates. So we can assume that it's heavily raining over the southwestern shores of Lake Erie. We can also assume that this freezing rain is also coming down at a fairly good clip. I want to go back to a graphic that actually Matt, you had up earlier, and just explain to the viewers kind of what all this means. We talk a lot about ice pellets, we talk about freezing rain, we talk about straight rain. What does it mean? How does it happen? Well, everything starts in the cloud. As you can see, there's 4 clouds here as a snowflake. Up there, it's cold enough, it's always snow. It depends on what kind of layer it's falling in below that. That's what determines the messy types of precipitation. So when we melt it completely, it falls as rain. When we melt it completely, but we have a cold layer beneath it, that's how you get the freezing rain, and we have that kind of setup. Ice pellets are basically a partially melted snowflake, and they come down as pellets, and they can be messy. And then, of course, straight snow is straight snow. We have the whole gamut with this storm. The only thing we're not going to see a lot of with this storm is just straight rain. Well, we will get it. Windsor will be switching over to straight rain, Matt. It's mostly going to be a freezing rain story. And by the way, Windsor has already seen 3 hours of freezing rain. Essex County, that's my neck of the woods. I grew up in Amherstburg, Ontario. They're getting hit already earlier than everyone else. The difference with our snowfall forecast, you were mentioning, Matt, we've increased those amounts in Toronto. You're right. That's because of the track of the system. So we're seeing that freezing rain really set up across extreme southern Ontario. The bulk of the snow is going to be parked right over eastern Ontario, along the 401 corridor, along the 400 corridor. And this is really not like a major story for northern Ontario as much as it is for, eastern and central eastern Ontario, like Bancroft. If anybody has plans to be driving up there, heads up, it's going to be a messy one, Matt.
Yeah, and Jacqueline, you mentioned the whole gambit. There are so many factors with this winter storm, all the different types of precipitation. I don't even think we've touched on the ice pellet forecast, which we can get to in a moment. Also, windy conditions and near blizzard-like conditions at times are expected, particularly along the shores of Lake Ontario later today. So we'll touch on all that. Jacqueline, we also have lots of questions flooding in on social media. Again, we encourage anybody watching, you can leave your questions, and we'll ask our meteorologist, Jacqueline Whittle, to get to those in a moment. But for now, let's bring it back in. Mark Robinson, our storm hunter, who's driving now on his way to London. We're seeing road conditions firsthand, really not looking good. A bit of volume here as well. And Jacqueline, I know you had a question you wanted to ask Mark once we got him back on the line.
I do, and we'll wait for Mark when he's up there. We'll just take that feed. I just want to answer a quick question before we go to you, Mark.
Yeah.
Somebody asked on Facebook, Richard Kitchen, how bad is it up the 400 right now? Not so bad. We are seeing some snow fill in, but the heaviest snow is yet to fall. I'm looking at the radar live here up the 400 toward Barrie, so you should be okay. I mean, you know, take it easy. It's going to deteriorate, but right now it's not as bad as it will become likely. Okay, now Mark, maybe you can give us an idea of what highway you're on and what you're seeing, and maybe you could give us an idea, Mark, of where you're headed exactly. I know you're headed toward the London area.
Yeah, Jack, I'm actually quite literally getting on the 401 right now. I see OPP officer just waiting. I figured they're going to be all over the place today just because of the potential for car crashes and people, you know, in the ditch. Just general emergency stuff. Whenever we get into conditions like this, you can actually have a lot of people may have thought winter was over. Take the winter tires off. No. Winter's still around, especially in southern Ontario. It tends to fluctuate at this time of year. We'll get very warm, and then we'll get a storm like this, and we'll get very cold, and then we'll get back to warm again. But where I am on the 401, it's all cold. So you're actually seeing a lot of snow on the 401. Looks like they haven't had plows through here yet. Now you can see the little ridges of snow that I'm passing over, and I actually did a whole winter driving, defensive driving course to figure out how to drive in this. And one of the things is watch well ahead, and when you do hit those ridges, accelerate just a little bit as you're going through those rather than hitting the brakes. That'll help a little bit. One of the most important things though for any sort of travel today is make sure you've got a full tank of gas, and make sure you've got just a little bit of extra equipment. I've got extra blankets, extra snow gear, food, water, all kinds of stuff, just in case I end up in trouble. I don't want to be I don't want to have anybody help me out. But if you are traveling on the 401, as I am, just past Kitchener, I'm headed westbound towards London to check out the freezing rain potential down in the London area. This is the conditions you're going to be seeing. So you are going to see the roads partially covered, a lot of traffic moving in the eastbound direction, not too bad on the westbound, but everybody's moving quite a bit slower than normal.
Thanks, Mark, for that update. Let's keep Mark up, and we'll talk to you. Just stand by with that shot, because that shot's very useful for our viewers who are potentially traveling along the 401 corridor. That's make sure you be careful out there, Mark. I have a question, and I'm going to go right back to Mark, if that's okay, Matt. I've got a question from YouTube. How much snow will Ottawa get? Well, Ottawa's in that, easily 15 to 20 plus centimeters. Same with you in Cornwall. They asked if they could see ice pellets. Not as much of a threat in that area. It's mostly going to be snow. The ice pellets are going to be a bit more of a threat toward the GTA. And then, as you saw with Mark and where he explained he was going, that's where we get into that freezing rain risk. So, Mark, I look at your shot right now and I think, okay, that's slick driving conditions. Everybody looks like they're doing pretty well and taking things slowly. When you get into a freezing rain event, it is dicey no matter how well the roads are treated. I mean, let's face it, you and I have covered a lot of these storms out in the field together, separately. I want to go back to 2013 with that ice storm. Just to put this one into perspective, Mark, we're looking at about 10 to 15 millimeters of ice accretion. 2013, the Christmas storm, which we always remember, was at 25 to 30 millimeters of ice accretion. So a very different type of event. But what advice would you have for people, that are going to be dealing with maybe 10 to 15 millimeters of accretion and trees potentially coming down?
I'm going to give you the first advice, the first little bit of hints or helpful advice I'm going to give you is remember, branches are heavy. Even though you think that they're not that heavy, there's, that's just a small branch. No. They're actually quite heavy, and if they're coming down out of the trees and you get hit by them, you can be injured. So take it seriously. Even though, we haven't got that 30 millimeters of ice likely for accretion in some areas, that's enough. If we get those winds, we get the winds in behind, the system or with the system, and I've already felt the winds pretty good already just with the drive here, you can still have trees and branches and power lines coming down. The other thing is, if you do have a power out or you do see power lines come down, assume that they are live. Do not assume that they are dead. Assume that they are live until you're told by Ontario Hydro or the OPP that it's safe to go near them. Do not go near them. I've seen more than one time where those lines look dead, and all of a sudden they drift past, touch something, and there's an explosion of sparks. That's the kind of energy that's traveling through some of those lines. You do not want to fool with that. So I'm going to say be very careful. Just remember, even small things can injure or kill.
Yeah, you bet. It's not what is it? It's not how fast the winds are going, it's what it's blowing at you, right? What the winds are blowing at you. And Mark, you're right. It doesn't take a lot in terms of the winds with these trees. Once they are weighted down, we've only got winds 30 to maybe 50 kilometers an hour. That can still knock those very vulnerable branches down and come down on those power lines. So I want to bring Matt Hamill back in. Matt, you've got some timing elements that maybe you could go over with the viewers, and I'll maybe look for another question while you do that.
Yeah, sure thing, Jacqueline. And that's some of the questions we are getting, and we encourage anyone to continue asking those questions. And timing-wise, some people saying, how long will this storm last? Well, we talked about just how many hours of prolonged freezing rain are in the cards for some areas. But yes, already kicking off Wednesday afternoon into the evening. Overnight, we really see a lot more of that ice pushing a bit further north, and then into Thursday morning, still that ice threat, and even into the Thursday afternoon and evening hours. As I just get a few more questions here, we still have that chance of ice pellets and freezing rain all the way into Thursday evening. Now, that is the timeline, and here is a look at, again, the precipitation types. We're seeing just about every kind, and as far as what areas might see the ice, and this is a question I have for you, Jacqueline. We received this online. Someone was saying, just how much snow or other types of precipitation is somewhere like Oshawa getting? Jacqueline, you touched on Ottawa kind of being in that zone where likely just snow. We're even seeing the system go into Quebec where just snow is expected. But for an area like Oshawa that's kind of on the cusp of this map behind me, what type of precipitation do we feel is in store?
Did you say Oshawa or did you say Ottawa? Did you say Oshawa?
Oshawa. Well, I was likening it to, you mentioned Ottawa before as getting snow, but for Oshawa,
right.
A little confusion there. What is the city like Oshawa expecting? A bit closer to the icy activity here.
Gotcha. Well, they're kind of on that boundary where we are going to be just seeing straight snow to that freezing rain. So an area like Oshawa will be getting into mostly snow, and you can see right along the boundary here. I think actually, if you could maybe take my map full, if it's possible. Thank you so much to our producer. So you can see there, 15 to 25 centimeters in and around that area is possible. And while we're talking about Ottawa, you can see your snowfall forecast. I'll tell you why, and I'm going to go back to the radar, which is my favorite tool ever, because you can really see where the warm air is hanging out and where the cold air is hanging out. And so you can see that at least at this point, you go to areas like Kingston and over through Cobourg in Eastern Ontario, like Oshawa. Those areas are all going to be sitting in the snow in the colder part of the air mass north of the warm front. Whereas Buffalo, the Niagara region, and then all the way back into Michigan and down to Windsor is in that freezing rain, the milder push of air, straight rain right over the lake. Look at that, Cleveland now picking up on some lightning. Boy, Mark Robinson might be... maybe he'll see some lightning over the lake. But yeah, it's definitely a story where the mild air is kind of parked over extreme southern Ontario, mostly London. If we had to make a bullseye for this storm in terms of the freezing rain, I'd be saying London. A little bit further west, maybe even back to Sarnia. Let's go to that freezing rain, because if there's one, I don't know which one's going to steal the show here, if it's going to be the freezing rain story or the snow story, Matt, but certainly 10 to 15 millimeters of freezing rain is a big story. And let's not forget about you folks closer to, say, Hamilton, maybe 5 to 10 millimeters. Again, couple that with some winds, we could have some problems. So I don't know if that's going to be the winner, if there's a winner, or if it's going to be the snowfall. I think, downtown Toronto, 20 to 30 centimeters north of the city, and then about 15 to 20 right in the downtown core is definitely going to leave a mark. Got a question here from Isaac Mel on YouTube. I have a flight tomorrow. At 6:30 a.m. at YYZ, so at Pearson Airport, do you estimate a flight delay? Absolutely. I think that there is not only going to be delays, Isaac, I think it's possible that your flight could even get canceled with this amount of snow that's coming in, plus the freezing rain, because we always have to think, Matt, I'm not an air traffic control person but there's a lot of impacts around the area, right? Like if it's not just Pearson, it's what's coming in, it's, Detroit, you've got London, you've got other airports that are going to maybe have to divert or delay flights. So yeah, it's a big system, and that's why we're in Storm Center for it, right, Matt?
That's right. And Jacqueline, on a personal note, I'm picking up my father from the airport tomorrow right after midnight. And I'm thinking, even at that hour, there's still perhaps the threat of some lingering precipitation. But even if things have kind of tapered off by then, the icy conditions on the road, still something I'm worried about. But of course, those delays and the sort of domino effect. So you might have a flight in the morning. There could be some concerns with delays. But even later into the day, perhaps, yes, things like the airports. And we even know, like we've already heard updates as far as other transportation modes. School buses in the Niagara region, some of those in Niagara have already been canceled for tomorrow. So we're just going to continue, I guess, as the evening goes on, and especially into tomorrow morning, just the magnitude of the impact on our Thursday as well, which we do expect to be quite significant.
And I'm glad, Matt, that they're canceling those schools already, because that's just, that's a preemptive way to get prepared here. So I think that's good news. Let's just talk about the storm again, the timing of it. So you can see here, this is about approximately 5 p.m. this evening, so Wednesday evening. It's pretty much straight snow for anywhere through Toronto, up toward Barrie, Oshawa, Cobourg, Orangeville. It's all a snow story for you. Now, this model isn't, 100%, but it should give us a pretty good depiction. Notice the switch over from Hamilton to London, over to St. Thomas, to the ice pellets and freezing rain. There's never a distinct boundary between precipitation types, Matt, because it has to do with the column of air that the snowflake is falling in. So it's not like we can say, well, the 401 corridor will be, it's going to be a messy mix of the two. But we do think that London over to Sarnia area is going to have the greatest freezing rain threat. And whenever I hear freezing rain, it's always it's a yucky part of the storm, right? It brings trees down, it can damage trees. Windstorms can do a lot too. We don't have a huge component when it comes to the winds with this particular storm. We will see winds, and that could take those vulnerable trees with the ice on them and blow them around and maybe knock them down on some power lines. Basically a north-northeast wind, possibly gusting as high as maybe 50, 60, 70 kilometers an hour, according to this model near London. But that's about, and then we'll see it shift around toward the northwest as we normally do, and maybe some lake effect snow behind the system, Matt. But, a lot to unpack here. I know you've been going over this map. Wednesday evening, heavy snow starting by that 5 p.m. commute. So if you're headed, I had a question, I'm headed home to Barrie, or, you're going up the 400. Better to leave early before the bulk of this happens. If you're headed westbound down the 401 toward London, it's only going to deteriorate. So get away early, because Wednesday overnight into Thursday morning, those icy conditions are going to continue. The roads are going to be likely a mess tomorrow. We've heard about the school cancellations. Maybe a work cancellation is in order for you if you have the ability to work from home. Probably not a bad idea. And there's a look at the snowfall forecast map. And Matt, we'll send it back into you with the look at the potential for power outages, which is a concern.
Yeah, so there's a look at the snow, and we've seen that kind of just increase throughout the day as we've gotten a bit more granular and specific with our forecast. So there's a look at the snow. Of course, we've talked quite a lot at length about the ice, and that's really what's leading to really driving that power outage threat. So all that ice in the forecast, we're into the 15 millimeter range on the upper end for some areas, which when we take a look at sort of the categories of freezing rain impacts, we're kind of in this threshold here, the 10 to 30. Of course, we're expecting less than 30, but certainly more than 10, and tree damage, long-lasting outages. So just how much of Ontario is under a power outage threat? Well, a whole heck of a lot, and the long-duration power loss is likely. I mean, we were seeing headlines as much as a 20-hour freezing rain event for some areas, and even if that is sort of curtailed, anywhere in the neighborhood of a 20-hour freezing rain event could be debilitating, especially with those power outages. Now, we'll take a look at, as we further along, some of those preparations, if we could take this full, because the writing is a little small here, especially with me standing in front of it. Batteries we need for those power outages, first aid kit, snacks, water, Also, things you want to have on hand for a power outage, no matter the duration: blankets, flashlight, animal food, and the phone chargers. So these are all things you want to have gathered. Of course, we're kind of in that cutoff now where tough to be running around and securing supplies at this point, but just really the things you want to have on hand in the event of a power outage. Now, with respect to power outages, Jacqueline, I want to ask you this as a meteorologist. Can you break it down for us? What is it about these ice storms that really cause this power outage threat? I know the winds can play a big factor in that as well, but ice, power outages, and winds, how does it all kind of tie together?
Right. Well, Matt, I covered an ice storm. I, of course, live in British Columbia now, and I covered an ice storm about a year ago in and around the Chilliwack area, and it was about the same amount that we're getting. And there was maybe a little bit more, but pretty close. And there was winds, but it's the heaviness. It's the ice that sticks to the branches, because it doesn't have to be just a major branch or a really large branch. It's all the tiny limbs of the trees, the heaviness of that. It doesn't take a lot of wind to blow that over onto a power line, and that's how you can get widespread power line or power outages, I should say. But you know, we've seen worse ice storms than this, but it is something to take seriously. And you mentioned all those great things to have on hand. You know, it's all good to think, oh, I'll be fine, until you're not, right? Until you like, oh, I don't have a flashlight. Oh, I don't have dog or cat food. You know, it's good to have those things at any time. But yeah, I'll just go back to the overall look of the system. And I want to show you two systems, actually, because we have this system currently, which is working its way, the center of the low, somewhere around northwestern Missouri. The warm front is what is causing all the ruckus here in Ontario. But we also have another system in the Four Corners region that looks to be ejecting out of the Rocky Mountains. We've got some video of all places. You know, a lot of people in the West, where I live, like if you live in the prairies or you live in Alberta, a lot of people head down to Arizona this time of year, and we actually have some video. I think my director, my producer, actually has this video handy to show you. It is really impressive with the amount of snow that we actually had in Arizona. Can I throw to that video? Do we have that video at the ready?
Yeah, it's remarkable to see this video when we have that teed up, Jacqueline. The idea that this kind of weather we're seeing in Arizona, so it stands to reason we could see some pretty wicked impacts in Canada where we're used to seeing snow.
Yeah, I mean, if it weren't for that American flag out on the porch, you could say that's just about anywhere across Canada this time of year. But the blowing and drifting, wow. Flagstaff, Arizona. A lot of people don't realize, myself included, like years ago when I visited Flagstaff. Flagstaff is higher elevation. Even though it's a desert, it is higher elevation, and that's how you can get snowstorms a little bit easier, because as we go up in elevation, our temperatures cool, right? Plus, they're dealing with a cold air mass. And so are we. So, you know, if Flagstaff's getting snow, well, then why are we getting rain in Ohio? Well, it's all about which way the winds are blowing toward where you live in the atmosphere. So let me explain that. We have basically a cold front here, a warm front extending all the way to, say, New York City. And with that, we have mild air being drawn up from the Gulf of Mexico, from the south. That warm air is going to overrun a big chunk of cold air that's hanging around into southern Ontario. So when we get warm air over top of cold air, I think the best analogy I ever had was our chief meteorologist, Chris Scott, always explained the hot fudge explanation. Think of a hot fudge sundae, and you've got cold because you've got your ice cream at the bottom of your cup. Okay, you just went to McDonald's and you got a hot fudge sundae. Not that that's where you maybe you go
I'm
there.
with you.
And you pour that hot fudge, right? You pour that hot fudge, that warm layer, over top of a cold layer. That's essentially what we're doing. We're bringing hot fudge or warm air over top of cold air at the surface across the Great Lakes, and that's how you can get an ice situation. And by the way, how fun would it be? Let's just go over to areas like Arizona, and we're seeing some snow in Albuquerque, New Mexico, seeing a little bit of light flurry activity in Flagstaff, Arizona, like we just showed you. So there's a cold air mass digging in. But you know, the big show in town, I don't need to tell you, you don't need to be a meteorologist to see it. There it is. That's the big system. We've got thunderstorms along a cold front in and around this region. We've got a warm front extending into Ontario, bringing this ice and snow threat throughout Thursday morning. I'm going to send it back to you with some graphics in there, Matt, and maybe if we have any other questions. In fact, I think do you have one, or do you want me to grab one? Because I think I have one.
I certainly, let's get to that question you have in just a moment. I just want to tee ahead. We see it's snowing in Arizona, so is spring around the corner? I think a lot of us thought maybe we had that false start to spring, but we do have the Weather Network's launching the spring forecast March 1st, starting at 6 a.m. So we'll have all the details on just the arrival of spring and how that's playing out. And of course, the following day, March 2nd, with meteorologist Jesse Uppel, a live Q&A on the Weather Network Instagram. So there you can ask your questions directly to another one of our great meteorologists, Jesse Uppel. So that is our spring forecast coming up shortly. But Jacqueline, of course, we do have a few questions to get to. Do you have one teed up there? Because I got a few lined up as well, and we'll also get to Mark in just a moment.
Okay, sounds good. I do have one from Kimmy Gilmore. She says, is Hamilton and Burlington more of a snow-related story for this storm or freezing rain? And would you recommend driving there tomorrow? Okay, so let's dig into this for you. Right now we have winter storm warnings across basically Toronto, Oshawa, over to Kingston, and where you get into the freezing rain warnings is where you're highlighting. So Burlington over to Hamilton, Kimmy. So is it Kimmy? Yeah, Kimmy. Kimmy Gilmore wrote into us. So you're within that freezing rain warning. Now, as far as the actual precipitation that will be falling in that region, we're looking at about 5 to 10 millimeters of freezing rain for Hamilton. But notice that, this is splitting hairs here, but let me just open up this graphic. Okay, just let me get rid of something here. Can I get rid of that? Let's see here. I apologize. Well, okay, disregard. Oh, okay, wait, hold on. I didn't mean to do that. I want to just show you there. That's better. The region where Hamilton along the 403 over to the QEW. See the difference. Disregard these numbers here, okay? Because I'm moving the map, so the numbers are a little different. But what I want to show you here is, do you notice what we call gradient here? So we've got heavy freezing rain, lighter freezing rain, and then lighter freezing rain over here by our legend. Well, it's important to note, because if you're in Burlington, you might be very different than what you're getting in Hamilton potentially. So my recommendation is don't drive, because you could be in 5 to 10 millimeters of icy conditions. The worst of it, of course, is going to be in and around the London region, as we know. But even the snowfall, now let's change our attention back to Burlington. Once again, just kind of ignore these numbers here, but you're into easily 10 centimeters of snow for Burlington. So it's kind of a mix of both. It's a tough question to answer. It's not just freezing rain, it's not just snow, Matt, it's both. And I would recommend to anyone, probably just best not to get out on the roads tomorrow, period. Or this evening, if you have the ability to get home early, we want to recommend you do so. Yeah,
well, speaking of being on the roads, we have our storm hunter, Mark Robinson, on location right now. And Mark's on his way to London, taking a pit stop here. Mark, what's the latest you have for us? We've seen earlier you're navigating some very treacherous conditions out there.
Yeah, I actually had to stop for gas, so I thought this would be perfect to readjust some batteries, do that sort of stuff. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to get out of the car and just experience this weather. And I can tell you right now, I'm not enjoying the experience. It's not fun. But that does give you an idea of what it might be like if you end up with a problem with your car. Like if you end up in a ditch, if you end up with just normal car problems, you're going to need the kind of jacket that I'm wearing right now. In fact, I'm wearing this one open because it's so good in the cold weather. I actually get overheated with this. But these winds are screaming along. I'm not even gonna try and measure them right now, because you notice I don't have gloves on. But either way, these conditions are nasty, and that is going to contribute to the amount of freezing rain accretion that we're going to see. Just because we're seeing 50 millimeters of freezing rain coming down, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have 50 millimeters of ice on everything. But we have to look at a few other things, and one of the things that contributes to ice accretion on branches is how fast the winds are going, because those winds can take away that little bit of that heat heat as the water turns into ice. A little bit of that heat gets pulled away, so that freezes just a little bit better on the surfaces. We also need nice cold surfaces. We already are. I definitely have that. I can feel the ground right here, nice and frozen. So this is the kind of thing that can really throw our freezing rain forecast off a little bit. So we do have to take it seriously, because we do have some good conditions for lots of accretion. But when I get to London, I'll let you know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, Mark, we're showing the snowfall forecast as we speak to you, and if we could keep Mark up, 20 to 30 centimeters is possible up to 400 mark. In and around London, of course, that's where we're going to be transitioning over to mostly freezing rain. And by the way, this map we're showing, Mark, includes ice pellets. So like just north of London, 15 centimeters is possible, but that could also include that messy mix of ice pellets. But downtown Toronto, Mark, 15 to 20 centimeters of snowfall. My goodness, we know what this could mean. This is going to be a bit of a mess out there on the roads, and you're already giving us a live eye, which we appreciate so much. At what point is it okay for me to nag at you like I normally do as your chase partner, to tell you to do up your coat and to put some gloves on? I am always telling you to do up your coat.
I was pretty sure that you were keeping me out here. You said, keep Mark up. I'm pretty sure you were keeping me out here just to cool me off a little bit. Yes, I'm going to put my stuff on. Don't worry, Jack. I'm going to be just fine. And I want to make sure everybody else is going to be fine as well. So make sure you've got your stuff on. Jack, I miss you because, I don't know what to do because you're not in the car to tell me, to put on my gear. So, yeah, you got to come back to Ontario.
That's right. Well, I'm there in spirit, but I'll tell you what, we really are looking forward to your coverage, Mark, because having you and your eyes out there is a game changer, and you're already giving folks a view of the 401, for example, down toward London, and you can already see that the snow is accumulating, and we appreciate your updates, but please make sure you stay safe on the roads. I know you will. When we talk about the 2013 ice storm, not even close to that in terms of the accumulation. But I think what's going to be the main thing with this one, like you've mentioned, is some of those unexpected surprises, right? We always have a surprise with each storm. You mentioned how the precip rates, so how heavy the rain is coming down, how quickly it can accrete to the trees. Are the winds going to be blowing strong where we can get what we call dynamic cooling and things cool a little more to freeze up? There's so many interesting processes, right, Mark, in the atmosphere that we have to watch. What are you expecting in terms of snow?
Well, you know what, Jack? I think I'm betting on the freezing rain because that's why I'm headed down towards London. But yeah, it is quite interesting to see that, we're looking at 15 to 20 centimeters of snow in the GTA itself. I think a lot of people in Ontario, especially this year, have sort of forgotten what winter's like. We've had such a very odd winter this year. It's been so warm. I mean, we had almost 10, I remember at my house, it was 10 or 11 degrees Celsius in early February. That is not normal. I assumed, we're done with winter. I can pull out my bikes, get my shorts going, and now I'm standing here in my parka going, oh, right. It's not winter until March 1st, and we do have our spring forecast coming out March 1st. I will be watching that one as much as everybody else, even though I kind of do know what we're going to say, because I am looking forward to thunderstorm weather. Aren't you, Jack? Because I'm hoping that you and I can do a little bit of thunderstorm chasing, because forget this winter stuff. I'm done with it.
Well, there's still more winter weather to come. Thanks, Mark. I do look forward to that, by the way. Let's go to the model again, and then we're going to get back to Mark Robinson, because he mentioned thunderstorms, and there is some thunderstorm activity happening south of the lake. That means in and around Cleveland, Ohio. I don't suspect we're going to see any lightning, but Mark could see something maybe off in the distance. What we will be seeing, though, of course, is the freezing rain. And you can see that this is suggesting around 5 or 6 p.m. It really starting to intensify around that St. Thomas into London. There it goes. It merges a little bit further north, 9, 10, 11 p.m. right through the evening hours and into the overnight time frame. That means we could be seeing upwards to 20 hours of freezing rain by the time it's all done. So that is certainly going to have an impact. About 10 to 15 millimeters of freezing rain is expected through the London area. But then while that's happening in London, Matt, it's all about the heavy snowfall through the rest of the province. So we're talking about, hey, and by the way, Matt, I imagine a good 15 to 25 centimeters based on the fact, like Mark said, this has been a very warm winter. Ski resorts will be very happy about this to get some fresh snowfall.
Oh, sure. At least some people will be happy with this, some of these conditions. But for the ice, I mean, that's a tough roll of the dice for much of southern Ontario, and we see there. And kind of in that, on that note, we just saw Mark on the road. He talked about all the driving safety and precautions, kind of emergency preparedness if you do get into a situation where your car is stuck. Norfolk County OPP issuing a message to drivers saying a slow down as conditions deteriorate. As we get a look at the weather alerts there. Take your time. Another message from the Norfolk OPP, check your lights, brakes, and gas level. And as we just saw Mark filling up on gas, that's certainly a good thing to have in your back pocket, is a full tank of gas if you do need to get on the road. Now, Jacqueline, there's the timeline. We've been kind of touching on this, really just such a prolonged from the Wednesday drive home from work into the Thursday morning drive to work or school, and even Thursday, tomorrow, coming home from work, still that chance. Precipitation rates decreasing, but there's still that possibility of ice pellets and freezing rain. Jacqueline, some folks are asking on social media, we got a message from Elizabeth. She was saying, will this linger into Saturday? So for folks who are kind of avoiding as non-essential travel right now, as is very good advice to do so, when is this going to let up? When can we get back on the road and maybe make that trip to Costco?
Yeah, that's right. How many trips to Costco in a week do you make, right? It's going to be wrapped up by the time we get into the weekend. I'm just going to roll this ahead because you can see Friday we're into some lake effect snow. That's about the extent of the storm. So once the storm passes, let's see here, winter storm warning issued for Toronto. TTC taking 41 bus stops out of service by 5 p.m. Some updates for you there. There's the system moving through into Friday morning. So notice the switch of the winds, Matt, over Lake Huron and Georgian Bay out of the northwest direction, and then really even down here through parts of Buffalo. Yeah, we get the lake effect machine happening because, again, we can attribute this to a very mild season, right? That the lakes are open for business when it comes to lake effect snow. Sometimes this time of year we'd have them froze up, or at least mostly. So it's not the case right now. We have a lot in the way of warm lake water to interact with this cold Arctic air. Just want to give you an update that the let's see, so winter storm warning issued for the city of Toronto. Okay, here's some other information that we can bring to you, everyone. We have the City of Toronto said warming centers will be open at Metro Hall. That's 55 John Street. It is currently open. Warming centers at Scarborough Civic Center. That's at 150 Borough Street. Cecil Community Center at 58 Cecil Street. And Mitchell Field Community Center, 89 Church Avenue, will open at 7 p.m. So that's important for many of our friends that unfortunately are on the streets, and that's where we want you to make sure you can go, because it is going to be cold, it's going to be snowy, certainly not a night to be enduring those conditions out there.
Now, Jacqueline, I know we don't have you for much longer. We have about 9 minutes left in this live stream in our Storm Center coverage. Do you have sort of any final sort of summation of what we're dealing with and what folks should be prepared to buckle in for as this storm really starts to mature throughout the evening tonight and, of course, into tomorrow morning, even stretching into the evening? As we get a look there. Perhaps Jacqueline might be already on the hiatus for a moment there, but we will get a touch base with Jacqueline once again. But again, here are the weather alerts. We've talked about that divide, right? The winter storm warnings are kind of in the middle here, and that's where we might see some of that ice, but much more likely seeing the snowfall. Of course, the blue, we get those snowfall warnings as not much of more northern parts of Ontario seeing any of the ice. And as we look ahead into areas like Ottawa and, of course, into parts of Quebec, it's really just a snowfall event. All the ice is really going to be more southern parts of Ontario, possibly those ice pellets and other things creeping into the GTA. But really that main thrust of the ice, and of course that greatest power outage concern, is in areas from Windsor, London, even into Niagara Falls, that prolonged freezing rain event. And again, the timeline we're dealing with here, Wednesday evening is when we really start to see the ice kind of expanding into more parts of Ontario. Over overnight, the ice pellets, and we'll now welcome back Jacqueline Whittle. And Jacqueline, do you kind of have that button to put on it? We're really in the dwindling minutes of this storm coverage, but for folks that have been trying to really kind of process all the information we've been throwing at them, what is kind of that button we'd like to put on it here in our last few minutes of coverage?
I like that. I like that. What is the button? Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I think I agree with Mark Robinson that this is going to have an impact when it comes to the freezing rain, Matt. So I'd like to hit on this. If you live in London, if you live, over to Sarnia and those areas, Woodstock, you're looking at a freezing rain situation, which means we could see power outages, which means you should be prepared. Make sure your devices are charged, you've got water, you've got medication, all those things. I don't suspect it's going to be days and days, but you could be without power. We have this general ice accretion impacts map that gives you an idea. Anywhere from 10 to 30 millimeters of ice accretion does cause often tree damage and sometimes long-lasting outages. So that's point number one I'd like to hit home on, Matt. And then secondly, the snow and ice pellet accumulation. Well, what does that mean? Well, ice pellets are just kind of a partially melted snowflake because we're bringing in mild air. So all it means is that it kind of falls differently than a proper snowflake. It can be heavier, it can be denser. Either way, whether you get an ice pellet, whether you get snow, it's going to be a disaster out on the roadways. 20 to 30 centimeters up to 400, almost 20 centimeters right in downtown Toronto. And this is a live look at what it already looks like in and around the London region. This is where Mark Robinson is traveling to, out on the 401. I believe that's a live look at the 401, Matt.
Yep. And I think we have just only a few minutes. And do we have Mark live? Because Jacqueline, I really like the button you put on it there, really harping on the power outages. But of course, Mark really helping to illustrate and bring to life the travel issues. And Mark, if you can hear us, can you touch on maybe just some of those wrapping up messages of the travel concerns and what people need to be aware of should they find themselves heading out navigating conditions like this?
Yeah, you know what, my only thing that I always like to say is we know that people are going to go out. We know that people are going to be driving in this. So if you have to go out, just make sure you've got extra equipment with you. Make sure your cell phones are charged. And when I mean equipment, I'm talking about extra jackets, maybe even a sleeping bag, extra water, food, first aid kit. These are the kind of things that I'd rather you have and not need than need and not have. And this was something I said during the big Christmas snowstorm this year, and I think a lot of people paid attention, and we ended up with people getting stuck on the roads in and around that Fort Erie to Niagara area, but everyone was okay on the Canadian side of the border because they had that extra stuff, and they were able to make sure that they were well dressed and ready for the storm. So I don't want to say that everybody should absolutely 100% stay off the road. I mean, that would be the best way to do it. But for those of you that need to be on the road, just be prepared. And you know what? Don't force it. Don't try and get through. Don't say, oh, I can probably make it. If you don't think you can make it, hunker down, wait for this to pass. This will pass. I'd rather you get to your destination a little bit late than not at all.
Agreed, Mark. Excellent advice. Just to speak to the roads, because we're looking at a live view in and around the London area from Mark Robinson, our storm hunter. But also, if I show you the radar, Windsor now has endured already 4 hours of freezing rain. And I can bet that areas like Chatham have got to be pretty close to that. And then up toward London along the 401 over the 402 to Sarnia, those areas are really going to be impacting. The roads are only going to deteriorate. So great advice from Mark Robinson. If you have to go out, take your time. Be very careful out there. We've got freezing rain now already lifting as far as, say, Fort Erie over to Buffalo, according to radar. That includes areas like Tillsonburg and, over to Brantford. It looks like it's maybe switching as well, Woodstock, and then over to London. I would suspect that Mark's going to be seeing a very different kind of precipitation coming up soon. Now, we'll go over to you, Matt, with some of our final thoughts here. Again, you've got the freezing rain map behind you. It's been great hosting this with you, and I hope that people heed the warnings that this is one that, I think we're a little out of practice, as Mark said, right? It hasn't been one of those winters where we've seen storm after storm.
Yeah. Well, there's that, and then you combine the fact we kind of had some of those double-digit temperatures, the spring-like feel, and now we're right back to winter, and this is a particularly nasty storm when you combine the snowfall totals, which are quite significant for some areas, but then you have the areas where there's the mixing with the ice, and some areas really it's just the ice-driven storm where the travel complications, I mean, we all are familiar with just how tricky it can be in the snow, but the ice, and sometimes there's an element of can't really see the ice. Of course, the black ice concern is something that kind of adds into it. Now, Jacqueline, I just want to add to, again, it's been wonderful hosting this with you. Mark Robinson doing a terrific job out there in the field for us, but we're getting notice that snowstorm cancellations for areas like Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara regions are already pouring in, so multiple schools and municipality updates for Hamilton, the Hamilton-Wentworth District School Board saying after-school transportation for today, and all administrative buildings closed as of 7 p.m. And for the Niagara region, the District School Board of Niagara saying that their secondary late buses are canceled for the rest of the day. And for the Niagara Catholic District School Board, there's going to be some cancellations as well into Thursday. So that'll be something we are going to have to keep a close eye on as these updates continue to pour in. And there's the timing, Jacqueline, as we see. It's a prolonged event. It's already kind of getting into the thick of it here as the evening approaches.
That's right, and thank you for that timing. I just want to give a shout out to everybody watching us from Ottawa because you're anxiously awaiting, the arrival of the snow. You can see on radar, if we can take my radar full, you can see that snow is kind of knocking on your door. So Kingston's into the snow, Belleville, Brockville, you're just about into the snow. Do we have the ability to take that radar full? Thank you so much to my producer. Bancroft just knocking on your door as well. Heavy snow, though, really starting to set up back to the west, in and around the Goderich area, Kitchener, downtown Toronto. This is just going to deteriorate, Matt, as we get into the evening hours. Remember, Toronto, this is not a freezing rain story for you. Downtown Toronto, this is all going to play out as simply snow, okay? But a lot of it, upwards to 20 centimeters of snow is possible. London is the area that we're most concerned about for that freezing rain threat in and around this area. Be very careful out on the roads. We're going to be continuing our coverage on the Weather Network despite the fact that we're ending this live stream. You can follow us on all platforms, of course. Join us on TV, on our app as our Storm Center coverage continues, Matt. There's lots to unpack, and we're going to be bringing you the latest in terms of school closures, of course, on your morning commute tomorrow, Matt.
That's right. We really tried to highlight the travel impacts that go from this evening all the way into tomorrow evening, perhaps the power outage risk as well. Make those preparations if you can. I'd like to give thanks to Mark Robinson out in the field for us, Jacqueline Whittle, an amazing meteorologist. It's been great hosting this with you. My name is Matt Hamill, and continue to stay tuned to our Storm Center coverage.